I think we're live. Okay, so this is Journeys in Podcasting, a morning session. We're connecting here from Bogota. Diego and I are both in different places. I'm Chris, and we'll be talking to Apple Distinguished Educator, blogger, author, Monica Burns, and I'm sure she has many other areas she can fill in too. Monica, how are you today?
Wonderful. Thank you both for having me. Very excited to be here.
And where are you connecting from? Are you in New York?
I am based in New York, and I'm here for the whole week, which doesn't happen very often. So really cherishing 7 consecutive days working from home. But it's been a busy travel season, all good things. But yes, New York is my home base.
Okay, cool. And what else are you involved in that we should know about? We know about your Edutopia presence. We know about your different articles. I read your book this week. What else should we know?
Well, I'm a former New York City public school teacher, and I've been out of the classroom for a few years now, focusing not only on the writing, which is something I'm passionate about, but also being on the ground and in classrooms working with teachers. So I do a good deal of professional development, working with teachers across the country, and then speaking both nationally and internationally about that work and best practices for tech integration.
That's very interesting, Monica. Were you always a classroom teacher, or were you some kind of technology specialist or coordinator? Or I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how you made that jump from being a classroom teacher to, integrating more tech and then becoming and starting to work in this professional development setting. Just because, I was thinking for some teachers it's kind of hard, like at the beginning, to start integrating and using more tech in the classroom. For some of them it looks like something that's like a very huge task, like something that might be complicated. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that, and like what made you in those topics, and what made you want to integrate more tech in the class.
So I started teaching with chalkboards in my classroom. So it was a quick step to that smart board that I wrestled out of a storage closet that someone had gotten delivered and no one knew how to use, and ordered different wires on Amazon, just trying to make things work, always kind of thinking about that, let's fix it, we can find the answer type of use for the technology that we did have. And then in 2011, my school received magnet funding, so that's federal funding to change to a kind of a thematic curriculum, which included a budget, a line item for technology. And so I was a grade team leader at that time and part of the magnet leadership team, and I kind of made that push for, let's try these iPads. They're here, they're available. No one really knows exactly what we're doing with them, but we had some netbooks that just were breaking all the time and kind of a mess. And it was a neat opportunity to try something new, to go one-to-one. And so at that time, we didn't have the money for purchasing apps for the iPads, and New York State was struggling to figure out the best way to make it happen logistically, right, to make those type of purchase orders and that sort of thing. This is before Apple Configurator, before those kind of big deployment options. And so Apple Education had asked me to speak on their behalf at one of their events to teachers to just kind of explain to them some of the ways that they could use free apps, different types of things that were out there to help people get started. And I was asked by the audience members, what's your website, what's your blog, what's your Twitter handle, all things that I just did not think of within the 4 walls of my classroom. I was really happy being a classroom teacher. I did not have the interest in taking on an out-of-classroom kind of admin role at that time. But the work that I started doing with my writing, having opportunities to speak and travel and do that training with teachers was something that I just became passionate about really quickly. And so I had some opportunities to transition, take some of the small projects I had been working on while I was in the classroom and turn that into what I do now full-time, which is mostly, teacher training and on the ground, a good deal of writing, and then some work where I'm helping other companies think about, if they're kind of up to par with what teachers are looking for in terms of their product development.
You mentioned that your first experiences integrating tech or working with a thematic curriculum, and we look at everything from TPAC to TIMS to SAMR model to activity theory to the 3E, Triple E framework, to the ASD student standards, to Henry Jenkins' and new literacies, to Thornburg's metaphors of human interaction, and all these different ways of connecting design, space, and technology. How do you think about it? Like when you integrate tech, is it just a tool that you put in there, or do you have like a special framework that you use?
A phrase that I use all the time, and anyone who's sat in a workshop or a presentation of mine has heard me say it, is tasks before apps. Right? We have all these great tools. I'm a curator of content for sure. If you visit my blog, there's lots and lots of things to kind of dive into and get excited about, but we really want to make sure we're putting the learning first. And there are some great frameworks for thinking about just that. Really identifying the topics, the objective, the goals for students, which might be for everyone in the class or might be individually, might be very content-based, might be more of a soft skills, and then thinking about what tools are out there that can really make that experience more energized, make it more relevant, make it more connected to the real world. So that task before apps is a phrase that I use all the time, just trying to kind of, let's put the learning first, let's come back to this, I'm excited about this and how this looks, and it's so important with the augmented reality piece where we might have that kind of gimmicky Pokemon Go grabbing our attention, but then there's the now what, right? What are we going to do with this? Why is this purposeful? Is this meaningful? There's something to be said for that hook and grabbing someone's attention, but you have to be ready to follow that up and really pack a punch with something meaningful.
Yeah, I did a bit of Pokemon Go playing to prepare for this interview, as well as watching Ariana Grande and Jimmy Fallon's Snapchat. No, but seriously, we've been on this theme of reprogrammable architecture, which I think is your idea of connecting what's going on in the classroom beyond. Especially this teachers and students taking ownership of their learning spaces and thinking as archaeologists by asking, if this classroom were excavated in the future, what would it say about our pedagogy? In Chapter 8 of your book, Student Stakeholder Learning and Setting Your Community Up for Success, you mentioned educators customizing school spaces. I wonder if you could unpack a little bit about how powerful scannable tools are for educators and students in owning their environments.
I think it's huge, and I love that you kind of start off and focus there, because when it comes to really thinking about learning spaces and making sure that things are meaningful for students, there's a lot of layers there, and so for me, one thing that really jumps out is this idea of being able to customize spaces where you're really pushing to empower students to be curious, to go exploring, to see things in the appropriate context, as well as using spaces to showcase work. And when we're really having students create on digital devices, there's a lot of options for sharing those products. But scannable technology makes it very quick and easy, and really something that can be sustainable as well. So there's really two sides that I see to it. The first being that idea of providing areas where students can interact with content in a place that's really meaningful. It could be something as simple as having QR codes connected to book trailers, on a book bin in a classroom library, or it could be something as dynamic as having students, pick apart a timeline of an important event in history, video of that person going green screen, layering all these wonderful things, and then placing that in an environment where other students can scan that augmented reality trigger they've designed and see the progression of events happen over time. So, it could be something where you have students really set up service and being the creators of that, or it could be something where you're just really setting up the space, letting students explore and really pushing that idea of curiosity.
Sorry, I'm trying to get my mic unmuted. You've written about Rayshawn Richard's Explain Everything app, and with us, this was one of the most mind-blowing applications that we picked up on immediately when we started using iPads. in this ability for deepening metacognition, for broadening the modalities accessible to student expression, and then with its latest updates this year, a pretty powerful live-time collaborative tool. How do you interrelate a tool like Explain Everything with scannable tech? Do you see integration points there?
Yeah, and just, a huge shout out to Rashawn Richards and the work that they're doing at Explain Everything. I mean, when I work with teachers and we talk about, really looking for quality over quantity and developing meaningful tasks that connect to learning objectives, Explain Everything is something where you can just capture so much of student thinking. Huge when it comes to formative assessment, which is an area that I've been thinking a lot about with technology tools this past year, and I'm working on a project right now under that umbrella. But from a scannable sense, I introduce the ACEs framework in my book, Deeper Learning with QR Codes and Augmented Reality. And the S in that framework is really all about sharing student work. So if you have students that are creating on Explain Everything, who are making tutorials, who are creating short animated clips, who are just demonstrating how to solve or how to do, fill in the blank, you can really get those pieces off of their device and into spaces where students can interact with them organically, and using scannable technology to do that. So, you might have those Explain Everything creations uploaded to a YouTube channel, which Explain Everything gives you so many wonderful integrations to make that happen really easily. But then grabbing that link to that creation, connecting it to a QR code, having it pop off an augmented reality trigger. One of my favorite examples for tutorials, especially ones made with Explain Everything, is here in the States, there's a lot of discussion. I think it's misguided sometimes, from poor marketing around the Common Core standards, and so you have a lot of instruction taking place in classrooms and strategies that are just different than what older brothers and sisters and parents learned when they were in school. So you have kids coming home and families that are frustrated because they just don't know how to support them with their homework or studying or assignments. So grabbing a tutorial, something that was made with Explain Everything, maybe another student created something on Explain Everything, and then connecting that to a QR code on the bottom of that activity sheet, on a QR code that was printed out on sticky labels and peeled and put into their old school notebook. Yet this is really going to just pop up off the page and give them that right now intervention.
You've already touched on this idea of reaching authentic audience, but I want to kind of ask it in a different way. We've been looking, we have a project that's kind of slowly developing called Hacking Active Learning Spaces, where we take Thornburg's metaphors of human interaction and we look at ways of defining classroom spaces and connecting space with purpose. A big part of this thinking is centered around the life or the mountaintop where learning gets transferred into the real world, or where it goes before an authentic audience. I know you mentioned several times in your book, and you've got several places in your blog. I wonder if you could sort of unpack some of the ways that QR codes and other forms of augmented reality make the classroom walls transparent and reach a larger authentic audience.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and for me, I really see that as two parts, right? One is that connection to what we talked about with sharing creations. So there's just terrific, free, BYOD, bring your own device, good for whatever you've got, creation tools. Of course, Explain Everything's a good example. Adobe Spark is one I'm very excited about. I've had the chance to really share that across the country at a few different events this past year, and it's a tool where you can make your own websites, make your own videos, right? So students need to have a purpose, and that's where that authentic audience comes in. They need to know whose eyes are going to be on that product, and if we can connect them with digital tools, they're now creating a website that looks like that website they visited, yesterday. They're creating a clip that looks like a commercial they viewed on YouTube. And now we just need to make sure other people are going to see it. And that could be something where we're tweeting it out, we're sharing that link in a social manner, or it could be saying, your audience is very clear. we are sending these videos to the school board meeting. We're going to put them on all the flyers so everyone can see just why you think it's so important that we build a baseball field and not a soccer field for the public service announcement or persuasive video you made, and connect that to a QR code, put it in everyone's hands, and let everyone kind of see that work. And the important part about that is really building a culture and in your school and developing that with throughout the community of what does it mean to scan for more information. We see QR codes in funny places, on drink coasters, on the back of a ketchup bottle. I'm here in New York, and in New York City, I'll often see QR codes underground in the subway where I have no service. I couldn't scan it if I wanted to. And so there's this idea that we need to build this capacity and the stakeholders, students, families, anyone who's going to interact with these student creations, anyone who's going to be their authentic audience, we need to show them how to access this information. And so having those kind of student ambassadors at an open school night, who are like, give me your phone, I'll download that QR code scanner for you, and that sort of thing, or grab an iPad for the cart. This is how you can see my video. And just building that sense of, I'm curious, I want to see what's behind here, and I know that there will be a payoff when I scan this beyond just liking, a ketchup bottle's Facebook page.
I've talked to a couple of educators, Paul Darvasi, who has something called Pervasive Learning, and Michael Matera, and both of them use this augmented reality and augmented reality gamification, where they gamify their classroom. And it's a lot on the same thing you're talking about, where they plant things in the environment where the students really don't know where the next clues are coming from. And in doing so, it makes them that much more, they observe much more closely. They're always looking for this kind of next thing. How else have you seen augmented reality affect the way that kids look at their classroom space, or where now everything can become a trigger, everything can become a link to something else?
And that's just what it is, right? You open a world for students, and it could be something where you are taking what's in your classroom, what's always been there, right? That poster, that anchor chart, that word wall, and snapping a picture and using something quick and simple like Erasma and turning it into an augmented reality trigger. And you'll link and see a video that will play to explain what that definition means on your social studies bulletin board, or watch a video of the desert instead of just looking at a map and wondering what it might look like if you were there. And so there's lots of things you can do. One of my favorite tools for creating augmented reality triggers, I mentioned this a few times in the book in the context of an organization's library, Lit World is a nonprofit I work with, but the tool Canva, Canva, I mentioned a few times in the book and have some pictures of that in action. It's a graphic design and poster making tool. I use it for the images on my blog, but it's perfect for creating augmented reality triggers. And so you can take that image, you can upload that image to, say, something like BlipR has a great great dashboard that's available for educators, and then you can decide what that animation is going to look like, how the buttons are going to pop across the screen. It's really something that can take your practice to the next level. And the examples that you mentioned of students not quite being sure, where to look, that's what we want. We want their wheels spinning. We want them thinking about, what might pop off their page. And for teachers who are looking to just get started, there's a great deal of content available. The folks at Daiquiri, have their Elements app, which not only is just neat if you're interested in chemistry, but they have lesson plans on their website as well. So there's a lot of people who are going beyond just the gimmick factor of, as much as I love, a shark popping off the page, if you're not using it to inspire writers or to make connections to an ecosystem, then it's just a shark popping off the page. So it's important to keep those things in mind, and the framework, the ACES framework, I talk about in the book. I just did a short Ignite at ISTE a few weeks ago, kind of going through in just the 5 minutes. But I think that's a great way to kind of pause and say, am I really using this very cool technology to its potential?
A lot of what you've talked about is about getting the product of learning out there. Well, I mean, we've talked about this layering of the realities, but like um, one of the things that I feel like, going back to Explain Everything and other forms of media that we use with the iPads, where it opens up all of these other modalities, is it offers us a window into a learning process, into student cognition that we didn't really have before. How do you use these triggers or QR codes or augmented reality to kind of make learning visible, to create windows into the process along the way to the product?
Yeah, so for me, when it comes to, thinking about something like Explain Everything, which is just such a strong example, I really value what that can do, not just for the product, as you mentioned, but for that process, and how it can be a window for gathering information. When I think about formative assessment and technology, or formative assessment in general, it's just, we're on a fact-finding mission. We're looking to see, where misconceptions are, where we see someone excelling, where we need to intervene, what strategy is working, what's not working. So from that perspective, I think that it's really powerful to have that window in. But then with the scannables, we can give students access to, their next steps. So if we have this window into their thinking and we identify those misconceptions and those needs or that opportunity for enrichment, we can be ready to go with distributing resources that are leveled, that are differentiated. It might be something that you have in your back pocket as a way to just, here's your cheat sheet to scan and see these vocabulary words come to life, right? Here's your cheat sheet for some really interesting ways to push your thinking with math, because I've seen your screencast and I understand that you understand and you're ready for what's next, and there's no point of you sitting back and doing this again today because you're ready to move forward. So when I mentioned the ACES framework and A being access, to give kids that access to really wonderful material quickly. The C, that curation, is really where we're able to use scannables to distribute, to get differentiated content into their hands, which I think is a pretty clear connection from some of the fact finding that might happen when we are listening into student thought process on a screencast.
This sounds a lot like kind of a personalized, to go back to an older term of the web quest, where you create links to kids very specific to their needs, or what we talked to Stephen Downs earlier this year about the difference between personal learning and personalized learning, where personalized learning is more of the adaptive learning that tech offers, where the tech finds out what kind of learner you are and then offers you your next steps, where this seems much more constructivist and personal to the individual student. Do you have much experience with having students create those next steps, of having them kind of identify what their next interest is, or what their next, more of in a project-based learning format where students get to kind of choose their path?
Yeah, and I think it comes down to that choose your own adventure, where you have students who might be moving through a pathway based on interest. You might have those QR codes and augmented reality experiences not be a secret, but be something where I know if I'm interested in seeing that heartbeat, I can scan this daiquiri trigger. I know if I want to watch a video on volcanoes, because that's the natural disaster I'm more interested in, right? I can go ahead and scan that. And so we have that ability to really empower kids to go out and interact with content that they want to learn more about. They want to turn to page 75 and not page 45, and that's choose your own adventure. So we can kind of give them the freedom to do that. One thing I think is important to acknowledge is kind of the devil's advocate position of the use of scannable tech. Sometimes you might say to yourself, well, I have my kids on Google Classroom, or we're in this type of LMS, we're using Seesaw. And so you know what? QR codes might not be the best way to distribute content to them, right? You might have something set up where you're able to really push links out easily. QR codes aren't cutting down any time when it comes to distributing maybe differentiated resources. But if you're in that BYOD environment where we have a different iPad cart every day, or kids are pulling that smartphone out of their pocket, it is a really nice way to give kids access to something that is not dependent on a login, is not dependent on a clear structure or that one LMS that everyone's signed into. So it does give you some flexibility, especially if you're in a learning space where you are not necessarily meeting with students every day, you don't necessarily have them all submitting work the same way or that type of thing. So I think it's important to acknowledge that it might not be the right fit in every environment when it comes to distributing resources, but it can really be an opportunity to shine in situations where you have particular obstacles you're looking to overcome.
I know a lot of schools are one-to-one. We're not, or the school I was most recently at is 1-to-2. But in the beginning, we weren't even that. We just had a few iPads, and we found out how to use them in different collaborative ways. In Chapter 5, which is designing collaborative learning experiences and embracing conversations and collaboration, you talk both about the mobility of learning, which you kind of just touched on with scannable devices, but also how it leverages collaboration. I mentioned we've been using iPads, and what we have found is that sometimes the one-to-one fit is not really what we're trying to get at, especially when we're trying to get at cranking up social interaction and providing this catalyst for divided labor. What have been your experiences with tech? And I'm going to borrow some terms from New Literacies, collective intelligence, dispersed knowledge environments, and different ways of getting kids to kind of unpack collaboration.
Yeah, so when it comes to one-to-one, and as I mentioned, I came from a one-to-one iPad classroom, but there were plenty of days where it's, just the odd kids pick up your iPad from the cart, or just the even ones grab your iPad, because there's really something to be said, and I saw it, as an educator in the classroom, and there's education research to back this up now with people investigating education technology tools, is just the power of a shared screen. And the fact that your students are leaning over, they're talking, they're compromising, they're taking on roles. Just on Tuesday of this week, I was up working with Lit World. They're a fantastic nonprofit based in New York City that does literacy programming all across the world. And so they have a summer camp up in Harlem that I was at, that I pop into. And so I was working with a group of students with Toontastic, which is just a really fun creation tool. We were working on some public service announcements, actually. And so we had enough iPads for the group, but I didn't want everyone to have their own. I wanted them to go beyond that think, pair, share, and now turn to your own device, right? I want them to lean over. I want them to talk about the setting. I want them to think about what their characters are going to say together, right? So I think that we often feel like there's this trap of needing everyone to have their own device in order to have a successful technology integration. I have an article for Edutopia that was published earlier this year on this idea of shared screens, and it's something that I really think is dismissed. It feels like it's my only choice, and it's not a good choice when you're working in environments where you don't have enough devices for everyone. You really do have enough if you are putting those soft skill development as a priority.
Yeah, we have a lab space in our library, and I ran a few tech sprints this year at different grade levels, and on purpose gave 4 kids one iPad with very specific instructions where they had to, go through some multi-track recording on GarageBand, which is a pretty complex thing to do in a 30-minute time period. But what I found was that having 4 kids and having a rotating, who's got the hands on the iPad for that moment was the fastest way for the kids to learn the process that we were trying to get them through. Whereas if they had each had their own device, I'm pretty sure that we wouldn't have been able to accomplish that in 30 minutes. But just cranking up that social interaction, they all knew the steps by, when we went in the next week into the classroom to actually make the multi-track recordings, they already had the experience doing it.
Yeah, and I think the collaboration on an iPad can be a little bit easier than the collaboration on, say, I've got my laptop here, but on a screen where you're not necessarily looking at the other person. You have something that's kind of dividing your work together, and it's not to say that working on collaborative docs isn't an important skill, right? You're learning about commenting and working together and shared space and all that. But that idea of leaning over that screen together to create is so special. And that could be two students leaning together over Explain Everything or collaborating live on Explain Everything. I know I do a lot of giveaways in my newsletter and all of that, and I have one that's going out this morning, I think it is, with Futaba, which is a classroom like language learning game, and the same idea, right? You can have 4 kids around the same device, and they can all interact and really work together as they build that vocabulary capacity. So I think there's a lot to be said for what can happen. It's not necessarily the end-all, be-all if you don't have one device in every child's hand every minute of every day.
No, and I mean, not to pump up, I know you're an Apple Distinguished Educator, but I feel like the iPad is the child's device. Like, it's just sort of made for them. It's tactile, it's visual, it takes in various inputs. You can, you can be acting in front of it, you can be recording audio in front of it, so it opens up that world of modalities where kids don't have to necessarily type. They don't necessarily have to always depend on writing as their form of showing their understanding. It opens up all of these other windows.
I think that's such a good point, and I understand the reason for Chromebooks. I do a good deal of BYOD, Chromebook, iPad, mixed device trainings. There's a lot to be said to giving kids that practice with keyboarding skills, the ability to work in shared collaborative documents. I understand it, and I think it's appropriate to give students that exposure. But that being said, there's a lot of good arguments, nice blog posts where people do the iPad versus Chromebook, and you realize that the portability, beyond just a battery life, right? But the portability, the ability to switch gears, as you mentioned, to a photographer, to a musician, to a storyteller, are so fluid. And I think it's hard for people who don't see the iPad as something beyond just a consumable device, right? Where they're just reading or watching movies on theirs. It's hard for them to imagine what that can look like in the classroom, and and I'm proud to be part of the Apple Distinguished Educator program, where there's just some great things happening with people telling that story of what's happening in their classrooms.
Well, and this shared artifact, sometimes just shared between a pair or a group, but also with Apple TV or with whatever reflector tool you use to throw it up on the screen. And like we said, this new update to Explain Everything, where now you can have multiple students in a shared space. I feel like the more that mixes with this augmented reality or this scannable technology, the more exciting it becomes to create these collaborative environments. If we can project up on the wall and have multiple kids working in that space, all of a sudden we have this not only immediate authentic audience all over the classroom, but we have everybody in that adjacent possible mode where they can see what every other kid is doing, or it's a group collaboration or a group creation. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said yes, I agree.
Sorry, I'm just kind of I know these are things I know you agree on, but that to me is the exciting part of, people say, oh, they're just tech tools, but they're not just tech tools in that they do change how our psychology and sociological thinking around education works, and I think that's part of the really exciting part. We mentioned Pokemon Go and how the whole world that is able to download Pokemon Go, it's not available in Colombia yet unless you are downloading it from the U.S. site. But the EdTech media has just been blowing up the last year to year and a half about reporting on VR and AR and this looming explosion that we all seem to be looking at. Classrooms have traditionally been subjective spaces where the interfaces, the ways of interacting were limited to the walls, the furniture, and the manipulative tools we have. With the introduction of iPads and mobile devices, this has already changed drastically. Do you see this 360 sensory manipulation changing that much more how we manage classrooms?
Well, it's been an exciting 6 to 9 months in the education space for virtual reality. I am just blown away with how quickly things have been moving. I think it was at the iPad Summit in San Diego like 2 years ago, so maybe 3 years come February or something like that. And I had that Google Cardboard in my purse, and I mentioned it to someone who I just assumed, kind of was up on all that, and they said, I haven't actually used it yet. I haven't tried it. And I handed it to this person and, stuck my iPhone in, and all I really had was a roller coaster app for them to go on. And just the look on their face when they finally pulled it, the viewfinder down, they were just blown away. And so I feel like that, it was stagnant at first. We had a slow kind of year for that first time that I had my, Amazon Prime deliver my Google Cardboard. But then, just watching since probably, the end of last year, Nearpod, that I've always been a big fan of. I was just talking about Nearpod at an ed camp earlier this week. They are just a fantastic formative assessment presentation tool, really engaging and useful for instruction. The introduction of the virtual reality, the 360 field trips that they have now embedded, perfect if you're on an iPad without a finder. I can tell you I've hosted professional development for 40 teachers while they're all looking up and down at the coral reefs and all of that. It really just transports people to new places. Now with the 360 availability on YouTube, the fact that you can use pretty much whatever device you have. The New York Times was sending home virtual, the Google Cardboard units for you to fold and stick your phone in for their pretty impressive app. It's just become open and accessible, and you don't need more than what you probably already have in your pocket or could borrow from someone else to take a peek at. It's interesting for some of the Oculus Rift people, right, who are doing this on a whole nother level. I think it's good for them because you're just going to have people who are buying in at this kind of low quality level that's still really impressive. And I think that this is not going away anytime soon from both an education and entertainment space. It's going to be a really exciting few years, and I'm just pumped to see how fast things are moving within the space for this.
This makes me think that a lot of what's changing in learning is how we frame it. Now I know this idea of the thematic curriculum has been around going back to whole language or John Dewey, experiential learning. Is there a lot of talk in the Apple Distinguished Educator circles about this kind of needing to frame the narrative of learning? That what we're really talking about is creating experiential learning events. If you go into a 360 reality space, it's like going on a field trip. And so your teaching strategies should be, I think, kind of like that, whether it's in a PBL type model or it's just a simple, this is what we do before, this is what we do during, this is what we do after. But the ways of thinking about these experiences and how they, frame the content of what we're trying to get across, of how they front load all of this cognition, and then what do we do with all of that afterwards? Do you see that as a major shift?
I do, and I think that the term disruptive education, right, is great if you're ready for what happens next, and you're being thoughtful about it, and connected to this virtual learning and this idea of the ADE or the Apple Distinguished Educator program. There's a fantastic ADE, Courtney Petbe, who's in New Jersey. I know Rashawn's actually been to her school. We mentioned Rashawn before. And she works with a low incidence special needs population, so students with a wide range of not particularly common special needs within their school building. So very exciting population to visit, very high energy building, wonderful group of children and students. And what they've done is they've done a lot of green screen work to help take these students that for a variety of reasons, might not be able to get to with the frequency, at least, the number of field trips, who might struggle. It might be very stressful. It might be anxiety prone to go out into certain spaces, yet now they're watching themselves on the screen, and there's a green screen behind them, and they can be anywhere. And it's just huge. It's huge. And so when you think about this transformation that's happening, among that kind of cohort of that community that I'm a part of, and just in general across the country, yes, that green screen's awesome. Taking your students on a New York Times or Discovery Education virtual reality trip is pretty special, but it's got to be more than just the exposure to it. There has to be follow-up. It has to be thoughtful. There has to be discussion around it, and I don't think it needs to be isolating, which I think is some of the fear about putting on a headset. There can really be a shared experience when you all look at something for 30 seconds and have your wow moment together.
Mm. No, you mentioned green screens. We had one installed in this lab environment, and we invented something that we just labeled Transmedia Theatre, where kids took stories and then they created backdrops or multiple backdrops for those stories, the changes in the plot. Then they trained their actors to act in front of the green screen while in live time it's projecting on another wall. And then there's kids like mixing soundtracks to go with the stories with sound effects and stuff. Totally blew me away, like what the kids were able to produce, through all of these different kind of sensory forms. Very cool stuff.
Oh, yeah, and it's so interesting too when we have an innovative learning kind of design, right? And the kids get excited and they're into it. They're the ones who are the, well, what if? Well, what about this, right? They're going to naturally push it to the next level, and I think it's really important to be open and ready for that. I know when I first had iPads early on, and iBooks Author had just come out, and I created the first chapter, of a book on, I think we were doing on Canadian history. It was one of our 5th grade subjects, and I made the first chapter, and the kids were they were like, this is pretty crazy. They can tap and a video plays, right? They were pretty impressed. I had about maybe the next day, it was why doesn't this one do that? Why doesn't this one? Or can we put a video here, right? And I said, whoa, way to be, they got very critical really fast. And I said, all right, it's not personal. We're on this together. So what is chapter 2 going to look like? You find the video, you find the image, you email it to me with your caption, you make a case for why this belongs in chapter 2. Like, let's turn this and you become the curators of this content instead of just giving me a hard time for a couple links that might be broken on my first try. And so I think that's so important, just to make sure in any of those spaces we're kind of ready for that, the natural what's next with a group of students, and then kind of changing that to place the ownership on them.
Cool. So you've done, you are prolific. Are you getting an echo? I'm getting.
I just got a little bit of feedback there.
Let me turn my mic down. Is that a little better?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, but I'm going to keep going. So you're all over the place. Where can people find you? Where can they find you? Where are you present?
Yeah. So I'd love for people to check out my blog, which is classtechtips.com. I just relaunched the website, I guess about 6-8 weeks ago, so I'm really excited about what's there. So if you looked at it a long time ago, hopefully you'll be a little more impressed with just the layout and all that. So on my website, you'll see there's a special blog section which has daily content, so every day there's something new. And if you're following along on Twitter, you can see that. My Facebook page has been a really neat spot for sharing and discussion the past few months. So that's another social media channel to check out. And then when you go to my site, there's also a newsletter. So I send out kind of that 7-day burst on Monday mornings. So if it's hard to check in all the time, but you like knowing things come to your inbox, that's there. And I usually have my Thursday kind of special updates or giveaways a couple times a month too. So that's all there. And then of course, if you do an Edutopia search for me, you'll be able to find my content. I've been blogging for them for a few years. That's a little bit more of a long form than some of the quick tips on my site. And my book, Deeper Learning with QR codes and augmented reality, a scannable solution for your classroom, is available on Amazon and Kindle, so paperback and Kindle. And you can also download it on iPads in the iBook store. And there's a link for that on my site. And of course, just an Amazon search, it'll pop up for you too.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I'm getting tons of echo. Thank you very much for this and speaking. And I hope to catch up with you again soon.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for having me. This was fantastic.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.